Welcome back. Unless this is your first time here, then you might be confused. But don't worry about that. Let's talk about detective stories. These are some of the most fascinating narratives that you can find. That is due to a plethora of reasons. Either because you are intrigued on what motivates the masterminds behind these crimes, or because the main character tends to be this really smart 300 IQ person that does not overlook any small detail and contradiction. Or maybe it's the fact that most of these shows try to make the audience feel smart by giving them enough information so they can decipher the mystery, so whenever the truth is revealed, the spectator can point fingers like, "I knew it!" And this is just a surface level explanation on detective dramas. If we get to the insane plot twists or meticulous design mysteries, we could be here all day. But instead, I would like to use this opportunity to talk about my favorite detective story, which is also my favorite show of all time. A Japanese live-action show originally released in 1994, counting with 4 seasons and over 40 episodes, created by playwright and director Koki Mitani. This is Furuhata Ninzaburō.
誰と話してんだよ。
こちらと
納得できねえな。
古畑任三郎です。
What is Furuhata Ninzaburō? You see, detective stories is quite a broad term, as there can be an argument that detective stories are just a subgenre of mystery. But the most interesting part about detective stories is that there are a lot of different types of detective stories. So now we have subgenres within a subgenre. Going over a few of these subgenres, we have the classic detective story, which at first presents a crime without showing the criminal or how the crime was committed. Instead, throughout the story, the audience is given clues until the truth is revealed. Some people like to call this genre whodunit, which is an abbreviation of who has done it. Pretty slick, I know. The opposite of whodunit is how catch 'em, which is an abbreviation of how to catch them. These stories are also known as the inverted detective stories. The way these stories work is that from the beginning we know who the criminal is and how they committed the crime, and the appeal is to see how the detective will catch them. Furuhata Ninzaburō is a detective story that follows the formula of how catch 'em. Each episode in Furuhata Ninzaburō is episodic, meaning that they have self-contained stories with little continuity between them. In most episodes, we get to see a murder or the events leading to a murder, so then the main character, a detective known as Furuhata Ninzaburō, confronts the culprits until they are caught. It is a really standard formula for a detective story, but what is so unique about it is its execution. From the very beginning, the viewer already knows what happened in the scene of the crime. There is nothing to put together, so what really is the appeal? Well, in How Catch 'Em, the appeal is how the detective uncovers the culprit's mistakes and entraps them until they confess to their crimes. Now, Furuhata Ninzaburō is not the first show to adopt a style like this. As a matter of fact, the How Catch 'Em formula dates back to 1912 with the fairy tale Singing Bone by R. Austin Freeman. And if we go a little further in the future, around 1950s, we find Dial M for Murder, originally written by Frederick Knott and later adapted into a movie by Alfred Hitchcock. Now, what you gotta know about Hitchcock is that he was the pioneer of so many things in cinema. Like, you know, a guy is important when there are college courses dedicated to discussing his movies. I just want you to picture this scenario. A bunch of young adults spend thousands of dollars just to discuss the influence of one man. It's crazy, but these are the kind of artists that make you appreciate the medium. But let's get back to the topic. The most famous example of How Catch 'Em is the American show Columbo, which is an extremely popular show around the world. But it is particularly popular in Japan. Just to give you an idea on how popular Columbo is, the character has been used for commercials.
いやいや、頭じゃないですか?
It has been referenced in other Japanese media. One example is from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stardust Crusaders, where the main character Yutaro says that he used to watch Columbo as a kid. And Columbo will inspire other detective stories like Columbo of Shimano and, of course, Furuhata Ninzaburō, with both series often being called the Japanese Columbo. Now, the way Furuhata Ninzaburō plays with the How Catching formula is really interesting. Episodes are fast-paced, the average episode lasting around 45 minutes, and usually we see how Furuhata confronts the culprits directly, and we see how Furuhata pulls up all sorts of tactics to put pressure on the culprits, either by acting persistently, or by annoying the culprits, or by pointing out contradictions, or by giving the culprit a full sense of security. This game of cat and mouse is played in all episodes, and it's the meat and potatoes of the show. And while the formula is the same for every episode, they still feel fresh and will leave you wanting more. Despite the fact that the show reveals who the culprit is from the beginning, there's still a lot of small mysteries that are not directly told to the viewer. This is a show where every detail matters, even scenes that might play as a joke at first, end up being important to catch the criminal. And this show is no stranger to insane plot twists. So even though there's no traditional mystery like many whodunit stories, this show still finds ways to surprise the viewer. But what makes everything come together so nicely is its main character.
一回やらせてください。
あんたね。
お願いしますよ。
Furuhata Ninzaburō as a character. Before I start talking about Furuhata himself, I would like to go over the actor that interpreted the character, Masakazu Tamura. He comes from a family of actors. His father, Sumasuburo Bando, was one of the most prestigious Japanese actors from the 20th century. However, he passed away when Masakazu was only 9 years old. Masakazu also had two brothers, Takahiro Tamura and Ryo Tamura, who were also actors. Masakazu himself started his career in kabuki and nihon buyo, which are Japanese forms of theater, but he was also a skilled swordsman, which later would land him roles in many jidaigeki shows, which are period samurai dramas, the most famous one being Nemuri Kyoshiro, which started airing in 1972. Fun fact, the character Kyoshiro from One Piece is named after this show. Now, Masakazu's career was huge. He appeared in a lot of movies, shows, and even commercials.
1種類を選び抜きました。乾いた後もほら、潤ってる。
He was even mentioned in the manga JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stardust Crusaders, where there is a page with the biography of the character Noriaki Kakyoin, and the favorite actor of Kakyoin is Masakazu Tamura. He was one of the most popular Japanese actors of all time. Unfortunately, Masakazu passed away in 2021 at the age of 77 due to a heart failure. But the legacy left behind is fascinating, both for samurai shows and of course Furuhata Ninzaburō. And what is so interesting about his role as Furuhata is that he rejected this role at first. During a special broadcast commemorating Masakazu, a story was told where playwright Koki Mitani wrote a script for a detective story and he envisioned Masakazu Tamura as the main detective. However, Masakazu had a strict policy where he would not act in a detective show. As such, he rejected this role. But after reading the script, Masakazu found it so interesting that he ended up reversing his own policy, and he ended up agreeing to the role of Furuhata Ninzaburō. This story sounds almost unbelievable, as Masakazu was the perfect actor to portray this character. To describe Furuhata as a character, I would like to go over three aspects: personality, relationships, and ideologies. Starting with personality. Furuhata is an odd individual. He is smart, but he does not have all the answers to all the mysteries at first. Throughout the show, you're going to see the process on how he gathers evidence, how he finds contradictions, and how he corners the culprits until ultimately reaching the truth. And Furuhata is not perfect. He's not a Gary Stu. He constantly makes mistakes. He's not careless nor incompetent. The character is perfectly balanced, and the show portrays him as a smart individual, but still feels like a real human being. The best way I can describe Furuhata's behavior is contradictory. His way of speaking is extremely formal and polite, yet he tends to be really sarcastic. Furuhata tends to act childish and petty, either by showing adoration for toys and games, or the fact that he's a terrible loser, or that he has a particular sweet tooth. But don't get me wrong, Furuhata is not immature nor narrow-minded. And this strange and contradictory behavior is complemented by Masakatsu's performance, as his portrayal of Furuhata comes with mannerisms like his curvature posture, or the habit of touching his forehead when thinking, or the way he points with his fingers at different objects. It makes Furuhata appears tacky, but again, this is part of his contradictory nature. The character is actually elegant and a gentleman in a way. It's a character where a lot of small details go against each other, and while in other stories this might make the character look as messy and even improvised, in this show works particularly well, as it is quite ironic. This character that is always looking for contradictions is a walking contradiction on his own. And Furuhata is a really funny and charismatic character. Even though this show is a crime drama, the overall tone is lighthearted. The show knows when it's time to be serious and when it's time for some comedy. The transition between tonalities never feels abrupt. The viewer is given enough time to process what's happening before transitioning between tones. But the humor in this show works so well because it seems like the show itself is self-aware. Every episode of the show, the main character breaks the fourth wall and makes a monologue directly towards the audience. Now, when I explain it this way, you might think that this is just like those Marvel stories where the character breaks the fourth wall and makes a joke to seem like it's actually a meta-narrative and the writer is 2 steps ahead of the reader, and the joke is not just a cheap excuse for bad writing, but instead a way for the writer to show how smart their narrative supposedly is. No, it's nothing like that. Actually, breaking the fourth wall in detective stories is not something exclusive to Furuhata Ninzaburō. The American detective drama Ellery Queen from 1975 also used this tactic, where the protagonist will give the audience a rundown on the case before the final confrontation, as a last chance for the viewer to put all the puzzle pieces together. Usually, when Furuhata breaks the fourth wall is to engage with the audience, giving them clues on how he will catch the criminal like Ellery Queen, or by adding a funny comment about the plot of the episode or some random miscellaneous comment. One of my favorite monologues is one where Furuhata reads a letter from a viewer that criticizes how unrealistic the show is, and Furuhata's response is the following one.
はよくプライベートで事件に遭遇するが、あまりにもリアリティがない。いくらドラマの中の刑事とはいえ、何でもありというのはいかがなものか。何でもありなんです。
What an absolute Chad. But while Furuhata on its own is an extremely interesting character, the relationship with other characters is also worth noting. Now, due to the episodic nature of the show, most of the cast changes from episode to episode, but there are a few recurring characters in the show. 2 of the most important ones are Furuhata's assistants, Shintaro Imaizumi and Mamoru Saonji. Imaizumi was played by the actor Masahiko Nishimura. He takes the role of the dumb assistant and comic relief of the show. Most of the jokes surrounding this character are about how bad he is at his job or how he gets on Furuhata's nerves. And Furuhata tends to play a lot of pranks on Imaizumi, but Furuhata also shows a lot of appreciation and respect towards Imaizumi. On the other hand, Saonji, played by the actor Masanori Ishii, is a more competent assistant. You could even say that he's like the Dr. Watson of the show. He's introduced in the later seasons of the show, and part of his arc revolves around respecting his superiors and also having this rivalry with Imaizumi. Apparently, Imaizumi is jealous of Saonji and he believes that Furuhata prefers Saonji as an assistant, and it doesn't help that Furuhata plays along with these shenanigans, teasing Imaizumi at any opportunity he gets. But overall, the interaction between these 3 characters feels natural and it's fun to watch. The 3 characters complement each other so well, it's like a triforce where each character balances each other, and throughout the show, each one of them goes through small arcs where their beliefs and ideologies are challenged, which gives us a perfect transition to our last point of discussion, Furuhata's ideologies. Furuhata as a detective is one that values the law above any other means. His belief and values can be compared to Batman, but in a more grounded and less dramatic way. Furuhata has a strong sense of justice. The act of murder for him is an act of selfishness, and while Furuhata advocates for the judicial system and the police, he understands how flawed these organisms are. One of my favorite episodes is the last episode of the first season, the final greeting, where Furuhata must face one of his superiors, a respected veteran detective who murders a criminal that was found innocent in trial for a crime that he committed. While there could be an argument that the detective's actions were not entirely wrong and it's just another way to punish those that escape the law, Furuhata argues that norms are needed in society, and while the law is not perfect, Furuhata acts as an agent that preserves order while giving a fair judgment to criminals. In a world without Furuhata, powerful people in law will abuse their powers for their own agendas. And this show is filled with this type of ideological battles, which is an aspect that is often ignored in many detective stories, but the way they are portrayed in Furuhata is incredible. One of my favorite sections of the show are the ending scenes of every episode. Once Furuhata reveals the truth and the criminal confess to their crimes. Here, we get to see criminals that put aside their pride, criminals that accept their punishment. There is no physical struggle, no attempt of runaways, at least most of the time. These are criminals that have accepted their fate. And we see how Furuhata leads the way for the criminals. And as the credits roll, we see how both the detective and the criminal step away from the scene. It is reminiscent of a stage play where the actors are leaving the stage and the curtains are closing. While many criminal shows portray criminal apprehension in an extravagant, often humiliating way, Furuhata Ninzaburō uses a classy approach that ties with Furuhata as a character. Our detective sees punishing a criminal as a pathway for them to learn from their mistake, an opportunity to change as a person, a chance for a new beginning. This is Furuhata's idea of justice. Furuhata as a character is fascinating. There are so many facets to analyze, and I cannot see anyone but Masakazu portraying this character. His performance is just perfect. The way he acts, the way he speaks, everything is so meticulously executed, and the script and production also help in making this character come to life. As main characters go, this one is my favorite one in fiction, and this character has resonated with Japanese audiences, as Masakazu won the award for Best Actor in the Television Drama Academy Awards 2 times for his performance of Furuhata. And so far, I have only talked about the characters. I still haven't got to the best part of this show.
古畑さんとやらあんたは鋭いお人だな
ひなの誉れいただきます。はい。
Furuhata Ninzaburō is not just a detective series. Before I went over the main character, now let's talk about the culprits. Culprits are usually the star of the show. They are the motivating force behind the plot of each episode. Most culprits only show up for one episode, and let me remind you, the average episode lasts around 45 minutes, so their time on screen is limited. As such, one of the challenges of the show is to present these small arcs where we get to see not only how these criminals committed their crimes, but also to know their motive, what actions they took to cover their tracks, and how they tried to misshape Furuhata. One of the strongest aspects of the show is its creativity. Culprits are put in unique scenarios and their plans are over the top. Every case is constructed differently, and what keeps this formula fresh is how diverse each case is. Just to go over some examples from the first season, we have a case where a man fakes the kidnapping of his wife, when in reality he murdered her. There is another episode where a Cited reveals a corpse on live TV to win a debate against a professor that argues that his psychic powers are fake. And there's another case where an actor in a samurai show kills one of the crew members during a rehearsal. Wait a second, that sounds familiar. isn't that the plot for the third case in the first Ace Attorney game? Ace Attorney's creator Shu Takumi is a huge fan of mystery stories, and he has gone on public record to talk about some of the inspirations behind the series. According to an interview done to Takumi in 2012 for the Hayakawa Mystery magazine and translated to English by user Ash from the Yakuten Saiban library, Columbo and Ellery Queen, which I have mentioned before in this video, are huge inspirations for Ace Attorney. But Takumi has also stated that he's a huge fan of Japanese mystery stories. However, this interview does not mention Furuhata Ninzaburō at all. But there's this tweet by Shu Takumi himself talking about Furuhata Ninzaburō and Masakazu's iconic performance. Anyways, the character that Masakazu Tamura performed, Furuhata Ninzaburō, leaves a strong impression. Even nowadays, I see people on TV imitating the character, and it amazes me how good those imitations are. Perhaps he's so easy to imitate due to how iconic he is. So it seems that Takumi is a fan of the show. And throughout Ace Attorney, there are multiple instances where the plot has been influenced by Furuhata Ninzaburō. One famous example is the first episode of the second season of Furuhata Ninzaburō, where Imaizumi, Furuhata's dumb assistant, is framed of murder by a defense attorney and Furuhata must find the truth in court. Just by the premise of the episode, it's pretty evident how Ace Attorney was influenced, even with the smaller details like the main character's assistant being framed of murder. But actually, Furuhata is not the first time that a detective show has a case inside a courtroom. Going back to Ellery Queen, there's an episode that takes place in a trial, and the main suspect is also a defense attorney. In late season 3 of Furuhata, there's an episode where a character uses a small statue of the Tinker as a murder weapon, which is also a recurring murder weapon in Ace Attorney. There is one more Furuhata reference that appears in Ace Attorney, but I'll save that one for later. My point here is to show how Furuhata Ninzaburō has influenced other Japanese creators, and in the case of Ace Attorney, this is one that I find fascinating as it is one of my favorite franchises. And seeing where some of the plot points come from is really cool. So with that out of the way, let's go back to discussing the culprits in Furuhata Ninzaburō. Cases in Furuhata Ninzaburō are not only about creative scenarios, but also about the confrontations between Furuhata and the culprits. The battle wits between Furuhata and the culprits are reminiscent of a shonen battle in anime, but instead of flashing attacks, we have a detective and a criminal laying traps and finding holes in their opponent's argument. The goal of Furuhata is to uncover the culprit's lies, and in most episodes there is a sense of urgency. There are events that add tension. As such, Furuhata must act quickly, asking incriminating questions subtly, often giving a false sense of security, waiting for the right moment to make his next move. And Furuhata is not just a one-trick pony. Each culprit is unique in the way they confront our detective. So Furuhata must adapt to different challenging situations throughout the show. And while Furuhata does not have all the answers at first, he is really good at reading the culprit's mind, and part of his tactic is putting pressure into the culprit so they're more likely to make mistakes. You know what they say, lies just create more lies. But sometimes cornering the culprit is not enough. Furuhata must find that last piece of conclusive evidence, and for that, he must think outside of the box, reviewing the entire case, until finally reaching that aha moment. This is a good opportunity to talk about the soundtrack of the show. Composed by Yosuke Hanma, who was the composer for Yu Yu Hakusho and Great Teacher Onizuka, among other shows and movies. His work for Furuhata Ninzaburō might be my favorite of his. The main theme of the show is so catchy. Jazz fits perfectly for the mood of the show as it is both stylish and exciting. And the soundtrack is used well in the show to add emotion to scenes, whether it is for comedy or for tension. One fun fact is that the remix of the main theme of the show appears in Dance Dance Revolution Fate Mix. Also, this was not part of the original script, but while editing, I discovered this mobile rhythm gacha game called D4DJ Groovy Mix, and a remix of the main theme of Furuhata Ninzaburō is playable in the game. This is like the craziest crossover ever. Furuhata meets anime idols. And that's not all. There's an orchestral rendition of the main theme by David Matthews Orchestra on an album called Furuhata Jazz in New York. It even includes a vocal rendition of the main theme, which is awesome. One last thing I would like to go over is the show portrayal of criminal motives. Each criminal motive is an important plot point in every episode, and one thing you have to understand is that the criminals in the show are humans. They have their lives, their dreams, their relationships. Each mind is its own world. In each episode, we explore a different world, in a metaphorical sense. Now, I have a question for you. Have you ever heard about the porcupine's dilemma? This dilemma was first conceived in Schopenhauer's short philosophical essays from 1851, and it's about a metaphor where two porcupines try to come in contact with one another. But when they become too close to each other, they hurt each other with their quills. This is one of the oldest problems in psychology, as it relates to human relationships and our natural desire to connect with others. But if we get too close to each other, we might end up hurting each other. As humans, we seek intimacy, but we also try to find that space between comforting and freedom. We are just like porcupines. Whenever we feel anxiety or fear, we activate our quills as a defense mechanism. I would like you to keep this dilemma in mind, as one of the most recurrent criminal motives in Furuhata Ninzaburō is adultery. Do you remember the episode where the guy fixed a kidnapping? Well, that happened because the guy wanted to hide an affair with his assistant. Or what about the episode where Furuhata goes to court? Well, the defense attorney did all of that to hide an affair. As funny as it sounds, there are many episodes in the show where the driving factor is adultery. It's up to the point where if the episode revolved around a couple, then most likely it had to do with adultery at the end. There's even a scene in one episode where a character makes a comment about it.
殺しだね。
まだ決まったわけじゃ。
多分機内に彼女の愛人がいるね。そいつが犯人だよ。
根拠は？
根拠はない。俺の推理はいつも勘だけが頼りさ。
Furuhata Ninzaburō is a detective drama at first glance, but when analyzing each part of the full picture, we get to see its social commentary. How this show points toward our complicated desire for that space between comforting and freedom. It shows how that surge can damage others. It even argues how selfish we can get trying to attain that space. And to explain that, I would like to share with you one of the most interesting episodes of the show. Season 3, Episode 5, The Reunion. Spoiler warning, I'm going to cover some major plot points about this episode. This episode is one of the best ones in the show. You should watch this episode knowing as little as possible about it. If you haven't watched the show and what I have said so far sounds interesting, I'll leave a timestamp on the screen so you can skip to the next section. But if you have already watched the show or don't really care about spoilers, then let's get to the episode. We meet a man called Ansai. He is a successful novel writer. He's married to a beautiful young woman and he lives a pretty comfortable life. Recently, he published a new novel and he receives news from one of the editors at the publisher where he works. This novel has been a success, but Ansai doesn't seem excited about the news. This is followed up by a scene where Ansai seems to be working on some preparation, but this is not his usual behavior. Night comes by, Ansai has a visitor, and it's our main detective, Furuhata Ninzaburō. Apparently, Furuhata and Ansai knew each other from elementary school. When Ansai was in 6th grade, An incident happened when graffiti was drawn on a statue that was at the school, and Ansai was blamed for it. However, Furuhata defended Ansai and proved that he was innocent. And yes, this is a plot point in Ace Attorney as well. Even though Ansai and Furuhata were friends during elementary school, in the present day they are not that close to each other. The last time they spoke was because Furuhata was looking for someone to adopt a dog that was put in adoption early on in the series, and Ansai agreed to take care of it, but the relationship can be described as acquaintances at best. Furuhata questions Ansai about the invitation letter that he received, but Ansai denies writing that letter. Instead, he argues that it was his wife who invited Furuhata. So Furuhata questions Ansai's wife, but she also denies writing the letter. A few meters away from Ansai's house, there's a small shed that is also owned by Ansai. He has a habit of going there to work alone on his novels. Furuhata accompanies Ansai during one of his working sessions, and Ansai reminds him of a game they used to play when they were kids. And to relive those memories, they start playing. They're having fun, sharing some laughs, reliving those simpler days. When suddenly, Furuhata notices something happening outside. Ansai's wife is having an affair with the editor. Furuhata checks on Ansai, but he reacts indifferently. He already knew, and he seems fine with it. But despite the apathy that Ansai displays, Furuhata notices the stress. What Ansai has told Furuhata has been contradictory. Why bother inviting Furuhata if they're not close anymore? Why bother letting Furuhata find out about the affair? As the viewer, you know that Ansai is plotting something, but you don't know exactly what. Ansai is a ticking bomb. At any moment, a tragedy will happen. Is Ansai going to murder his wife? Or perhaps he's going to murder the editor. Editor receives a call that he must go back to the office for an urgent meeting. At this moment, we are at the night before Furuhata is supposed to leave. If something is going to happen, it will be now. The night starts with everyone meeting at Ansai's house to play some games. Ansai offers everyone a drink. On the surface, it seems like an innocent meeting as they laugh and joke around. And the night keeps going. One by one, the members of the meeting start feeling exhausted. Ansai's wife goes back to her room. Furuhata's assistants are falling asleep in the living room. Ansai goes back to the shed with the dog. All the pieces are finally set for the crime to happen, and for the first time, Furuhata is there before the crime is supposed to happen, and it's up to Furuhata to stop it. The last confrontation can be described as an emotional roller coaster. I will use this opportunity to warn you about the content of the following section as it covers sensitive topics. Furuhata goes to Ansai's shed. After reviewing the facts of the case, Furuhata finally unveils Ansai's plan. Ansai's plan was not to murder his wife. Ansai's plan was not to murder the editor. Ansai's plan was to take his own life. Ansai faked that his wife invited Furuhata entering the dog to leave suspicious evidence. Ansai faked a phone call to the editor so that he could leave the scene of the crime. That way, the primary suspect of his death would be his wife. By inviting Furuhata, Furuhata will investigate the crime scene, and as everyone was sedated by the drinks, the logical conclusion would be that the only person that could be responsible for Ansai's death would be his wife. This was a plan of revenge, but it was also an escape plan. Ansai suspected that sooner or later his wife's affair would be made public by the media. He was incapable of dealing with the pressure at his age. His only escape from this conflict was by leaving this world. Ansai is willing to pull the trigger, and Furuhata is faced with his biggest challenge so far, a desperate man that is about to bring an end to his life. There is no much time left. Furuhata cannot allow any wrong move in this situation, but he's not giving up. In a powerful performance, Furuhata tells Ansai that protecting life is everyone's responsibility, even when we are in pain. There's always going to be a chance to start over, no matter how old someone is. There is always an opportunity for a new beginning, perhaps one of many. And then, Furuhata says one of the best lines I have ever heard in any story. Even if I'm going to die tomorrow, who says I can start a new life today? As Ansai reflects on Furuhata's words, he unloads the gun and Ansai's life is safe. The episode ends with both Ansai and Furuhata playing the same game they used to play as kids. The reunion is one of the most emotional episodes in the show. It is so different from most of the episodes. But the reason I picked this episode is because it's the one that best portrays the themes of the show. Furuhata Ninzaburō is not just a detective series. This is a show about human relationships, how our own nature tends to be selfish, how our own desires harm our loved ones, how our fear of loneliness activates this defense mechanism that isolates us from others, and how our biggest enemy is our own ego. Ansai is a man that made a lot of mistakes. He tried to find that space between comfort and freedom. Inviting Furuhata was part of his twisted revenge plan, but it was also a call for a friend, a call to someone to save him. And he even said it himself. The only thing he does not regret from this plan was inviting this old friend back to his life. Furuhata acts as this reminder that despite how selfish we can be, there is always an opportunity to learn from these mistakes, to become a better person and move forward. You might argue that this message might come up as too optimistic, to the point where it's unrealistic and even childish. And yes, that is true, there are more complexities to consider. But the message is not entirely about redemption. The message is also about celebrating life. And with that perspective in mind, Furuhata Ninzaburō becomes one of the most impactful and beautiful celebrations of life that I have ever seen in any form of media. And the legacy that this show has left behind is fascinating.
さあもう一球いきますよ。
The legacy of Furuhata Ninzaburō. Furuhata is one of the most beloved shows in Japanese history. Furuhata has been directly referenced in anime and manga like Gintama, Pop Team Epic, and even Detective Conan, where there's a character called Ninzaburo Shiratori, obviously inspired by Furuhata. And in the Detective Conan manga, there are special features that come with every volume that showcase a famous detective character alongside a recommendation of one of their stories. And for volume 23, the featured detective is Furuhata, and the recommendation is the first season episode Dirty King. More recently, Furuhata has been referenced in the anime Dandaran. One fact that I haven't told you about the culprits is that they are usually played by other Japanese celebrities. One notable example is the baseball player Ichiro Suzuki. He's one of the greatest baseball players not only in Japan but of his era. Just among his accolades, he has won the awards for Major League Baseball All-Star Game 10 times, and he has won the Gold Glove Award 10 times as well. And I'm not even scratching the surface when it comes to his accomplishments. And he appeared in one of the episodes of the show playing himself. Other guest stars are Fumiyo Kohinata, who has starred in many shows and movies. The most interesting to me is that he played Yanni Yogi in the live-action Ace Attorney movie, but he also voiced Ishiro Inuyashiki in the anime Inuyashiki. Another guest star is Salma Agashiya, who is a lead star of many talk shows in Japan, some of them still going up to this day. Another one is Hiroyuki Sanada, who has actually appeared in many American movies, well known for his role in John Wick. Another one is Takeshi Kaga, who was one of the hosts of the cooking show Iron Chef, which is like the Japanese equivalent of Master Chef. And this is just the surface of the rabbit hole. There were so many guest stars that appear in this show. But when it comes to guest stars in Furuhata, the most well known of them all is the crossover of Furuhata Ninzaburō and the Japanese boy band SMAP. In probably the most popular episode of the show, this is a 2-hour special where Furuhata Ninzaburō faces off against the members of SMAP, as all the members of the band come up with a plan to murder a guy before a concert. This special was heavily advertised. According to a special broadcast, this was the first time in 2 years prior to the production of the episode where the entirety of the band participated together in a drama. SMAP also has their own talk show known as SMAP x MAP, where they have made multiple parodies of Furuhata Ninzaburō. One of them is actually a sequel many years after the event of the special episode where they appear, where the entire band comes up with a plan to escape prison. And there are others that make fun of the original series. It shows that the members of the band were actually fans of the show as well. And there is more to the legacy of Furuhata Ninzaburō, as there were multiple spin-offs. One of them was about Imaizumi, the dumb assistant. But there's also a movie about Furuhata during his teenage years. And there are a lot of fan-made projects about Furuhata. One of my favorite ones is his web series by Yutaro Hitorihuruhata, where he makes his own episodes of the show. He plays all the characters, and despite being homemade, he did a great job recreating the essence of the show. And his videos include endless subtitles, so it's not only an entertaining fan-made project, but it's also a really good way to learn or practice Japanese. This show is huge in Japan, which is quite unfortunate as it is inaccessible anywhere else. This is the point in the video where I would recommend everyone to go and watch Furuhata Ninzaburō. Unfortunately, this show is not available on any streaming service in the United States. The only way of watching this show legally is by importing the show physically, but this is quite expensive, and as far as I know, there is no official English translation. And yes, there are definitely other ways of watching this show, but for legal reasons, I won't go over the details. And it's a shame, because this show is special for me, and the purpose of this video is to expose it to others. This video is a love letter to the show, and as long as I have this platform, I would like to use it to give more exposure to those pieces of media that fall under the radar. It will be easy for me to talk about the latest trending topics, the things that everyone on the internet is losing their heads over, but I will only talk about things in this channel that I find interesting. And I would like to appreciate what Furuhata Ninzaburō has meant not only for me, but for so many people. And I just hope that one day, everyone can get to enjoy this show as much as I do. Thanks for making it this far into the video. This has been the most challenging video I have done so far. I would like to give a quick shout out to the user Crolux Michael. He's a Celeste speedrunner and a friend of mine that helped me with the translation of many Japanese articles and videos. This video would have not been possible without your help, so check his social media, you can find them on the description. If you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate if you leave a like, and if you're interested in Furuhata Ninzaburō or you have watched the show, comment down below your thoughts about it. I would like to hear your opinion on this show. Also, if you'd like to see more content like this, please consider subscribing, as that helps the channel grow and also keeps me motivated. Lately, a lot of people have joined the channel, and I hope that even more people get to join us soon. Lastly, you can follow me on social media where I post updates about videos and other projects. Once again, thank you for watching the video, and until next time.